Dave's showing us his Willy. All this and more on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
As easy as Lotus 123.
More mad marbles.
Jet Set gets reset with Pet Project.
All this and more coming up on the show today in This Week in Retro.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Hello chaps, how are we all doing this week?
I'm great, thanks, Neil. How are you?
Yeah, not bad, not bad. I met a legend this weekend.
Who?
A legend who goes by the name of Pajako6502, regular contributor and listener to the show. Hello, Paul.
He's pretty much the script writer, isn't he?
He is. It was lovely to meet him. It was one of those situations that I often have when I have visitors to the cave, which is I meet someone, I know their real name, have a lovely time with them, and then a bit later go, oh, that's who that was, because you don't make the link between the Twitter handle or the Discord handle until later. So, I should have said to you, Paul, thank you so much for your contributions. So it was a good weekend. Yeah. How about you, Chris? What have you been up to?
Yeah, not too bad. Still discovering the C64 for the first time. And my mate Shane lent me this. Last week I had the tape cart, and he's lent me the Pi 1541. So essentially an emulator. So it loads games at exactly the same speed as the original disk drive, and it can do multi-load discs. So that's really cool to get my head around. And it's also got a fast loader on it as well.
I was going to say, does it incorporate a fast loader? Because that's essential with the disk drive.
Yeah.
So are you going to get like a 3D printed case for that? To put
well, this is just on loan. When I get my own, then probably I will. But it's got a series of buttons on the front, and it's got an LCD screen. So you kind of need visibility and access to all of those as well. Plugs into the cartridge port, funnily enough, and then also into the 1541 port on the back of the C64 as well. So, yeah.
Right, so it's drawing power from the cartridge port.
Yep,
and
it has a beeper to mimic the drive sounds as well, which is very handy, and a drive read light, because there are a couple of occasions when, not being familiar with how long things should take to load on disk on the C64, I assumed it had crashed, but the lights were still flickering, and that was a godsend. So, and other than that, I mean, Dave, I know you're an Atari ST fan, but I've joined the Atari Club again, because I did have one of these back in the day.
Welcome to the club.
And I've been very naughty. This was actually in a local retro shop, and I've picked myself up a boxed Jag. So when I spend this much, and I'm not going to say how much, it wasn't overly expensive, but these have gone up in price, as everybody knows. And this is box complete, fully working, and I bought a game with it as well. This is going to get taken away by the wife and wrapped up for Christmas. So, yeah.
Oh.
So this will probably be the last day it's in my room.
How nice is it going to be to unwrap that on Christmas Day? That's so cool.
Be fantastic. And then I get the joy of reliving. Yeah, exactly. I'll forget that I've got... That kind of thing happens at this time of life, doesn't it? Oh, that's right. I bought something. But yeah, I'll have the joy of rediscovering how poor all the games were. So fantastic. Looking forward to that. What about yourself, Dave? Yeah, there are a couple of good ones. Yeah. Go on.
Well, a wonderful thing has been submitted to the subreddit by one of our viewers. In episode 75, if you remember, we talked about the 30th anniversary of a certain Ed game, and I struggled with the correct pronunciation of it. Our wonderful viewer, Der Eckbeer, well, let's call him Seaman, because that's what he does in these video clips. He's here to pronounce it correctly.
Hi, this is Simon, live from the Wolfenstein Dam, or in English, Wolfenstein Dam. And I just want to tell you how to pronounce Wolfenstein correctly. It is a very German-sounding word for sure. Maybe that's why they picked it for the game. But the Wolfenstein Dam is actually named after Moses Wolfenstein, who was the guy who paid for the synagogue here in Steglitz, district of Berlin. And so the castle Wolfenstein, or in real German, Schloss Wolfenstein. See you, bye.
And there we are, a definitive answer. Thank you very much. Wolfenstein. Now, Chris and Neil, say it properly.
Wolfenstein.
Bierstein.
Close enough.
Our first story this week comes from user Clara Dweller over on our subreddit. Let's just take a moment, shall we, to appreciate the wonder that is the spreadsheet. And I'm not being facetious here. The spreadsheet was perhaps the first true killer apps. I don't think there's even a perhaps in it. It was the first true killer app. Out of all of the apps that you could get on home computers, the prime example being VisiCalc, often quoted as the first killer app on the Apple II. The perfect coming together, a spreadsheet is, of using a computer to its strengths, so speedy calculations being made, making your life genuinely easier, and allowing you to look smart with the boss with your well-formatted tables of figures. And I tell you what, people gripe about automated checkouts in Twitter recently. In fact, I've seen a lot more griping recently about automated checkouts. It seems to be the thing to moan about at the moment. But how many people did the spreadsheet put out of a job when the computer could suddenly do all the number crunching? Wow. Thousands, tens of thousands. It must have had a big impact over the years. For me, when I first used anything spreadsheet-wise for anything other than just simple curiosity, when I used a spreadsheet in anger for the first time, it was Microsoft Excel. How about you guys? What would have been the first ever spreadsheet package that you used?
I didn't use the version that he's ported, which is the DOS version, but I did use Lotus 123. I used version 5 in Windows 3.11, and I worked in a sandwich factory. My job there was to print off all the labels for all the sandwiches, and being 18 sometimes and hungover and not concentrating, I did get it wrong a few times. Expensive mistakes for the company if all the sandwiches were automatically out of date. We used old Zebra thermal printers, which had the rolls in the labels all are real. And I know that Mark Fixie's stuff once told me that's what the Doom discs were done as. So at the disc duplication center he worked at, they got the big rolls of labels on with the red Doom logo on it, and he printed the text in a Zebra printer. Anyway, Lotus 123, if you remember, I used to do it to use stock control. So we were making around 20,000 sandwiches a day, and I used it to count the stock usage. So what we started off with, what we came in, what we finished up with. And from there, with a bit of creative thinking, I was able to calculate exactly how much each sandwich cost us to make in raw materials, even allowing for wastage, etc.
You know, that's a really good example of a use case. And you were 18 years old when you first used it. Awesome.
Yeah.
Chris, what was your first spreadsheet package?
I'm trying to think, and actually, funnily enough, I think the first spreadsheet package would have also been Lotus 123, because it was at school, work experience. Did some work experience for MPI, which was National Provincial Insurance. I think they didn't know what to do with me because I was just high school age. Gave me a Pascal book to read because I said I was into computers. Never touched Pascal. And then one of the managers who wanted to go out for a long lunch gave me a task to do in a spreadsheet, and I knew they were using the Lotus suite. So yeah, probably was actually Lotus 123.
Excellent. Well, it's interesting that you've both picked Lotus 123 as your first, because as Dave touched on in his answer there, this week's story is all about Lotus 123 and a chap by the name of Tavis Ormandy, I hope I'm saying that right, who loves Lotus 123 so much that he's decided Linux needs a native port of it. Lotus 123 was released in 1983, and it was the VisiCalc killer. So the killer app, I guess, putting a stop to the dominance of VisiCalc and bringing not just spreadsheets to us, but also graphical charts and database functionality to the party. So Lotus 123 came out in 1983. Linux wasn't a thing until 1991, which means Tavis has ported software to an operating system that didn't even exist when Lotus 123 was being used originally, which is kind of neat, I think. I like that. He describes the port as a combination of unlikely discoveries, crazy hacks, and the 90s BBS wares scene, which we'll come on to shortly. Dave, you've told us you used Lotus 123. What did you move on to from that? Did you move on to Excel, or was there anything in the middle for you?
Eventually, we moved on to Excel. I feel that Lotus was the one that everyone used. Everyone had Windows, Microsoft Word, and Lotus Notes and Lotus 123. But I think Excel eventually took over, and I think it had all the functionality. But I can't think of anything that I now use in Excel in my day-to-day business that wasn't in Lotus 123 in 1995. I may be wrong. I mean, there may be dozens of things that we now take for granted that weren't there, but it feels as if Lotus 123 was the kind of the finished article, and it's not really changed since then.
It's funny, I used VisiCalc on the Apple II when I was restoring it recently, and of course, there's far more functionality in newer modern packages, but it did feel instantly familiar, and you could do all the basics straight out the box on the screen, on a green screen on an Apple II. I could probably do 90% of what I actually do in a spreadsheet using that in the modern day. So I can see how powerful and exciting it must have been when it first appeared on the scene. Now, the only reason that this Linux port exists is because of piracy. Now, Tavis started out simply looking for an old compiler for a programming language called LPL, which I think is Linear Programming Language, which was used to create add-ons for Lotus 123. Tavis wanted to be able to play with add-ons and hopefully to link Lotus 123 to modern data sources, because that's his idea of fun, and who are we to judge? Well, it turns out nobody kept a copy of the compiler or the software development kit. Lotus was so successful that anyone who actually had it back in the day just assumed this will be around forever. We don't need to keep hold of this. So they just binned it. And so enter the pirates. Can I get some pirate impressions, please? There we go.
Jeremy Timbers, lad.
Where's the rum gone?
If I do a pirate accent too long, I end up in Northern Ireland.
I end up in Somerset.
I couldn't have hoped for better pirate impressions there. Tavis reached out to the world and discovered that there was an old sysop out there from 90s BBS boards who amazingly had taken and still possessed tape backups of old BBS systems. Now, I like to think that computers become vintage after a number of years. Of course they do. But perhaps this is an example of piracy becoming preservation. And, after a number of years of use, piracy becomes archiving, perhaps. I don't know. But this sysop had a copy of the LPL SDK on his backups, which really pleased Tavis. But not only that, he had a copy of Lotus 123 for Unix, which had long been considered forever lost. And so using that as his foundation, he took on the task of porting it to Linux, and he's documented the whole process really nicely on his website. It's not just a technical story. It's just a nice story to read for anyone. For anyone, really. You don't need to be technical at all to follow it. Just it's a nice thing to read. So it's well worth checking out. There's a link to the website in our show notes if you want to go and have a read about his porting adventure. And sorry, I've just been distracted because Gizmo's come in to join me here. She just sat under my feet. So, Chris, we've heard Dave's spreadsheet experiences. Tell us a little bit more about yours.
Yeah, so obviously the Lotus 123 experience I've already shared. That's probably the only time I remember specifically using Lotus 123. I certainly remember the wider suite, though, Lotus Notes and especially databases. They just seemed to crop up for years in everything I did. Even when I came, first of all, back in the UK, I worked for a healthcare, and one of the clients came in with this database of stuff that they wanted us to basically improve and redo and whatever, and that whole thing was on a Lotus Notes database. None of us had any experience in that, so we ended up farming that out. Oh, should I say that? Yeah, that's absolutely fine because that company doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, they just nobody
extradite you.
Nobody wanted to know about it, by that period, and that would have been the late 90s. But then when I came here to Perth, the IT support job that I ended up with in around 2005, the entire support database was in a Lotus Notes database, and we were happily still plodding along with that. And then when I eventually moved from there through another job into a job at a college, one of the IT lecturers, I remember having a little sort of impromptu meeting with him, and he was convinced that we should still be teaching Lotus Notes in the college. This was around 2009, and that perhaps all the learning material should also be stored in a Lotus Notes database. Clearly, that's just where his career expertise was, and he really wanted to sort of hold on to it and drag it in to the modern day. But spreadsheets, Excel, you can't get away from Excel. I would have started with it at home, well, also tinkering at college, but at home, Windows 3.1 days, I was using Excel for fun, would you believe, to keep track of my Laser Quest scores, because I was that addicted to Laser Quest. So tracking that, and then all the way through to the present day, In terms of the role that I do now, we track client inquiries in one area that I look after, and that's all just done in Excel. And I've got some routines running behind the scenes to plot stats and produce graphs for the monthly report, that kind of thing.
Nice.
But also Google
were to-
Sheets. Yeah,
Oh,
go
Google
on.
Sheets, yeah.
Yeah,
I was going to say, if I were to say to you X97, L97, would that mean anything to you?
Now, it's probably similar to what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of the one in Excel 95 where it opened a Doom Easter egg. Is that the one?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this was in Office 97.
Okay. I thought it was in 95. Okay. Yeah.
That one may have been that you described, but the one that I remember was a flight simulator hidden in Excel 97.
Okay. Yeah. So,
you would fly it. It was very much like Magic Carpet style rolling landscapes, and it would go full screen, and you'd fly around with the mouse.
Yeah, that's ringing bells. Yeah, the one I remember was in 95, and a similar thing. I can't remember the exact coordinates, but you go down to a certain cell and you put in a certain formula, and it opened up a Doom-esque thing that I'm pretty sure was kind of done in like ASCII. But anyway, and you had to walk across this chasm, and if you got to the other side, then you got to see a scrolling thing of the developer names for Excel. That's where they hid their names. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, Google Sheets. I use Google Sheets to track my retro computer spending habits and make sure they don't get out of control. So yeah,
I don't track mine because I don't want to know.
Yeah,
well,
you don't want to know that.
It's not just the spending, although that's a big part of it, because I sort of try and attribute myself a certain amount of pocket money to sort of rein it in a little bit. But it's also to keep track of the games that I want to recollect and I don't yet have. And the great thing about Google Sheets is, of course, you can just pull out your phone and bang. I know you can do the same thing in Excel with Office in the cloud and stuff, but I don't know. I just find it easier in Google Sheets. Bang, open it up. If I'm, out and about and somebody's selling me a game, have I already got that? I can quickly check it out. So it's very useful. Yeah.
Do check out the show notes for the link to this week's story. And having said what I said earlier about piracy becoming preservation and archiving, let's try and put a number on it. After how many years would you say piracy becomes preservation?
2 weeks.
Immediately. I speak with someone who's had no knowledge of piracy.
Oh, of course. It's hard, isn't it? Because you could say 15 years, you could say 20 years. But then if you think about something like, I don't know, World of Warcraft, it's been around for about 17 years and it's still being played. So it's still current. Yeah. So hard to say, isn't it?
At what point do we get away with admitting it?
Yeah, I guess that's the question.
When does it become abandonware? We know that's not a real thing, but
I guess it only becomes abandonware when copyright expires, technically, or it's been
we'll all be
released.
dead.
Yeah.
Well, there we go.
You mentioned something. You mentioned Gizmo. How's her little paw? Is she
her
okay
paw
now?
is fine. She's bounding up and down the stairs on what was her bad foot. I think she had a bee sting or something. She likes to get things under her back leg and like stomp on them. I don't know if Johnny does that. So she's obviously stomped on something and got stung, and then she felt sorry for herself for a few days, and now she's fine. Yeah,
that's good.
So,
fantastic.
Pirates, we salute you. Can I get a 3-man salute? There we go. Come on, Chris.
Okay, well, it's interesting that we were just talking about piracy and when it stops becoming piracy, because as you guys know, I'm trying to recollect the games that I had in the past, and I'm trying to collect them in the same form that I had them. So if I had the original big box, then I want the big box. But if I had the original budget version, then I want the budget version. So it doesn't bother me that my copy of Marble Madness is actually in this form, which is a pirated disc with my own handwriting on it, because that's how I had it back in the day. It was one of the first Amiga games I ever got hold of a pirate copy of. Most of my games were legit, but yeah, Marble Madness, I must confess, never actually paid for, so sorry to the developers. But also, I never even saw it in the arcade. I never saw it in the wild. I don't actually recall seeing it. I know this is no excuse, but I don't recall seeing it for sale in the shops either. Obviously, it was an arcade machine originally by Atari in 1984, and it came out on the Amiga in 1986. So maybe that's why I didn't see it in the shop, because I didn't jump into the Amiga until 1989. So it was well past its use date. There we go. That's preservation. It's gone. We put a date on it. It's 3 years, Neil. There you go. But I was certainly never aware that there was a sequel to Marble Madness. So Marble Madness, if you haven't played it, it's an isometric view game. The game scrolls down towards the player, if I can put it that way, and you control a marble that travels down elevated ramps, and it's a race against time, and you have to avoid falling off the edge of the ramps that you're on, and you also have to avoid obstacles and enemies and that kind of thing. It's simple, but it's fun. It's just a nice, simple game that's really easy to get into.
Is there anyone who hasn't played Marble Madness?
Oh, good question.
Surely everyone must have.
Yeah, well, all three of us clearly have then.
Yeah. I think everyone must have played Marble Madness at some point.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to have played it in an arcade because it regularly features at the Play Expo events, so they bring one along. And have you played it since, Chris, on an arcade? Because you
No.
said you didn't play it back in the day.
No.
It's a really good arcade experience. You've really got to like slap that trackball, really get it going, and
Nice.
change direction quickly. So yeah, if you ever get the chance, you've got to.
Yeah, I think I do need to. It's a bit like Asteroids. I have to confess, I've never played Asteroids in the arcade. So not Asteroids. What am I talking about? Missile Command. Sorry. So I've never played Missile Command with a trackball, and clearly, once you realize it should be played with a trackball, it makes sense, and you want to play it that way because clearly that's actually going to be easier than a keyboard or joystick. So, and the same I think is true with Marble Madness, but I was used to playing it with joystick. I usually opted for, I think you could play it with mouse and trackball on the Amiga as well, but I certainly never did, always opted for the joystick. But yeah, so this mysterious sequel, there was a sequel, and so this is all according to a story by Kyle Orland on Ars Technica. I'm sticking to that pronunciation. So Atari essentially released a prototype of what they called Marble Man. So that was the name for the sequel in 1991. So quite a few years after the original. And it was designed by Bob Flanagan. And they just basically released prototypes, so test cabinets to gauge the public perception of the game. And it was a 3-player game this time, whereas the original was 1 or 2 players. It was trackball controlled, same as the original. Had 17 levels, more enemies, including things like animated trolls and things like that. In the original, everything kind of felt like it fitted with the marble theme. Nothing really felt outside that. Whereas this, they sort of pushed the boundaries a little bit and had these animated characters running about the place. There was more variety to the levels and the style of levels. And there was even a character animation for the protagonist, which is a ball, in the fact that it would turn into this Marble Man superhero character when it crossed the finish line and shout out Marble Man as a sort of digitized voice sound effect. Initial testing was apparently very poor, and what they thought was that things had moved on. It was sitting in arcades next to things like Street Fighter 2 at this point, and the trackball, they reckoned, was putting off the punters, as well as the cheesy superhero animations and the Marble Man sounds and all of that kind of stuff. So they released another prototype. So again, still didn't get past prototype stage. And they simply called it Marble Madness 2. And they ditched the trackballs and they replaced them with joysticks. So see previous conversation. This kind of game needs to be played with a trackball. They replaced it with joysticks and fire buttons instead. But they did also get rid of the annoying character animations. The results, funnily enough, were the same, and the plans to release it were eventually scrapped and it disappeared into obscurity. Apart from apparently there are still some test cabs around, so I don't know if at any of the expos that you guys have been to, you've seen a Marble Madness 2, or a Marble Man arcade cab.
Marble Man, he can't stop himself. Marble Man, it's in there. It's in your.
Did I say that wrong up above? So the first prototype was Marble Man. I might have said that wrong actually. So the original prototype was Marble Man, and then they re-released the prototype as Marble Madness 2. That's what I meant to say.
Okay.
Yeah. So
no, I've never seen a prototype cab or Marble Man out in the wild. No.
Okay.
No, never.
Apparently they're out there, but you'd have to be very lucky to come across one and play it. Until now. So a ROM has been leaked by a guy lovingly named by his parents as Dank2079. Pretty sure that's not his real name. In fact, nobody knows who he is. He's just sort of, kept himself to himself. But the ROM's already started spreading through the internets. And it's been verified as being legit. It appears to be I think I'm right in saying, the second version of the prototype ROM. And it doesn't have trackball support. But work's already been done in MAME to make it playable, so you can actually get hold of it and give it a go. in MAME. So, yeah, what about you guys? In terms of Marble Madness, we all agreed that we've all played it. What do you remember of it?
Well, Marble Madness is the reason I always wanted a trackball. It really is. It always looked like such a fun game, even in the screenshots before I got to play it. It just had a lovely art style. And I found myself as a teenager working in a museum, a dinosaur museum. I think we've mentioned that in a previous show. And the exhibits in the museum, one of them used an Atari trackball. I think it was an Atari 2600 trackball attached to an Amiga 500 running an Amos program. So I do remember when I was working on a Saturday, Sunday one weekend, I borrowed the trackball. I took it home from the museum and plugged it in for a quick game of Marble Madness. And, it transformed the game. I was doing it. Was I doing it through MAME at that point? No, I don't think I was. I can't remember what platform I played it on with that, but it did transform the game, and it was much more like the arcade using a trackball. And then, of course, you got the music, which will forever be an earworm in my head. You know that
Oh, yeah.
it just on loop. It's great, and the sound effects and the animations. It's just such a nicely made game, and it converted well to other 68,000 based machines as well, because that's what the arcade was based on. So lots of good ports. When I built my first MAME cabinet around 2000, 2001, I had to have a trackball for that purpose. So I put that in the middle. I used something called an OptiPack, and I had an arcade quality trackball so I could really smash it around. Really enjoyed that. But even long before I got my hands on Marble Madness in any form, I would have been playing a similar kind of isometric puzzly assault course, because that's kind of what the game is, with a game called Spin Dizzy, published by Electric Dreams on my Amstrad CPC. Of course, that was inspired by Marble Madness. It came later, but it was the first of that type of game that I got to play. So I should definitely go back and play that again soon, yeah.
Yeah, for myself, like I've already said, I played the original on the Amiga, and I don't remember playing it in any other format. But the weird thing is, which probably explains why I ended up with it as a pirate copy, if I had have seen it in the shop and looked at the box art and the screenshots on the back, I doubt if I'd have shelled out my pocket money for it. It's not the sort of game that would have grabbed my attention and I'd have found exciting to buy.
Yeah. It's quite an abstract thing to look at, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, there we go. And Dave's holding up a copy for the podcast listeners. So, yeah, I mean, what's that got on it? I can't see because when we're recording, it's a blurry view, but it's cartoony graphics.
It has a picture of some marbles.
Yeah.
The words Marble Madness. It says Marble Madness construction set because the port to the CPC, they decided to enhance it by adding a construction set to it, so you could create
cool.
your own. Yeah. Melbourne House, who I think had nothing to do with Australia. A bit like you. Fake.
Oh, nice one. Yeah, I'll pay that. Yeah, that was good. But yeah, I do like a good construction kit though, so maybe that would have got me. But yeah, I don't think I'd have probably even picked it up off the shelf. And same if I had seen it in the arcade, I doubt if it would have, won any of my coins, unless maybe if I'd seen somebody else playing it and seen them slapping the ball around and seeing how much fun they were having on the screen. Maybe then that would have grabbed my attention. But when you do get into it, and this is the weird thing, it's not a game I would have bought, but it is a game I enjoyed playing when I did get my hands on it through the pirate copy. So yeah, I can't really justify my pirate endeavors because it's a fun, simple, it's a quirky game. And there is something therapeutic about controlling a marble down a ramp. And I say that not just in the game, but even in real life. I remember when my boys were a lot younger and we got one of those marble ramps, you set it up, you set the course out, and to dictate where this marble goes in real life. I don't know. I find that fun and therapeutic. What do you think, Dave?
Therapeutic. It's not therapeutic for me. It was frustrated and frantic. The arcade game, and Neil has touched on this already. The arcade game had the trackball, and it wasn't like you would see a trackball in your school where you touched it gently. You were flapping that thing about. It was going all over the place. It was frantic. It was desperate. The marble had momentum. You had to try and get it to stop what it was. So it wasn't therapeutic. It was a great game though. But what made it for me was the pokey sound chip on the original coin-op, which I prefer to the SID sound. And people will hate me for that. There'll be comments. I had the game in the CPC, and it didn't catch me in the same way. And of course, the lack of the trackball makes a big difference as well. And Spin Dizzy, I played that as well, just like Neil mentioned. Spin Dizzy, I think, was a better home micro take on Marble Madness. So unless I'm an idiot, there's no Atari System 1 or Atari System 2 for Mister yet. So that's Indiana Jones, Paperboy, 720, Super Sprint, APB, and of course Marble Madness, but not Marble Madness 2, because reading up on what Hayes said about it, it's totally different hardware. So that's a big one that's missing from Mister at the moment. And when it comes out on Mister, Atari System 1 and 2 for Marble Madness, am I going to need to buy a trackball?
Interesting. Of all those games you've listed, they're all, great games, but Paperboy is... Sorry, 720. 720 was one I really couldn't get on with the trackball. I didn't feel that enhanced the game.
It had a weird control to it, and I can't remember what it is, but I remember a podcast I listened to, Jack Flack, Rob O'Hara. He talks about which arcade machines he likes to buy and own, and it's ones with unusual controls because you can't emulate those; they're unique.
Because Paperboy was the handlebars, but 720 was the trackball. Oh, never could get on with it. And then, of course, when you try and translate that into MAME to joystick, just never quite gels, does it? But it's a lovely game to look at. And the arcade had the boom box at the top of the marquee. I always loved that. Yeah.
That's the skateboarding
Anyway, I'm
game,
going off
isn't it,
topic.
720.
That's the skateboarding game, where
Yeah.
the bees chase you. Yeah.
But even like Super Sprint, am I right in saying, I mean, yes, it had the steering wheel, but isn't that the one where you essentially span the steering wheel stupidly fast to go around the corners? Or at least that's how I saw people playing it. Yeah.
You were trying to turn these corners that were impossibly tight, and you were going back in yourself. So yeah, you were doing that. But again, that added to it, and it's not something, maybe Neil's hitting something earlier on, it's not something we see with emulation. If I've got my Mister out, I don't slap it about like that. I don't mistreat my stuff like you did in the arcade, because in the arcade, you paid the money, and that was it. It wasn't your machine.
Yeah, that's true. So there's more details about the history of the prototype in the story on Ars Technica, and a link to a video, in fact, of the original arcade prototype being played. So do have a read and have a look at the video from the original source. And thanks again to Projako6502 for contributing to the show and by way of bringing this story to our attention in the subreddit.
My story this week is on Set Willy, and it was submitted by me. I submitted it. I'm not ashamed of it. I'll keep submitting stories, and if they do get enough community interest, they could get picked. So feel free to go to the subreddit. Even if you don't have something to submit, have a look through what other people have submitted. Hit the little up arrow if there's something you want us to talk about. Hit the up arrow. The more upvotes it gets, the more likely we are to pick the story. And this was one that got a few upvotes. So a guy by the name of CPL Games put a tweet out last week, and he's doing a fan remake of Set Willy. But the key difference is that it's free scrolling and it's not a room-by-room remake. So the original Set Willy is a seminal UK game originally on the ZX Spectrum, but appearing on nearly every micro you could buy in the early and mid-80s. It's a difficult game, and it has fixed length jumps. So once you start the jump, you know exactly where you land. You can't change it, which I know is completely out of fashion these days. It's a sequel to Manic Miner, which everybody should play in the Amiga to see how to make a truly awful game. And now that Miner Willy is rich, he's bought a huge mansion. He's had a big party, and he just wants to crash out in bed. But his angry housekeeper, Maria, not his wife as people thought it was, but his angry housekeeper, Maria, won't let him until he's tidied up the mansion, which means collecting every single item. So CPL has created a remake in Game Maker Studio 2 on the PC, but the big deal is that instead of each screen being its own separate thing, the entire mansion is now one big screen that you move around in. So there's no more screen changes, it just scrolls. And on the gameplay video he's made, about 2 minutes in, it zooms right out from just the screen he's in, and you can see the entire mansion, and you can see all the monsters moving in around the mansion at the same time, and it's amazing, probably because I'm used to it from playing it as a kid. Now, Neil, you must have had this in your 464. Do you remember it?
Of course, everyone had to have this on their 8-bit micros. And the way you just described that zoomed out, it kind of reminds me of when you used to buy the magazine and they'd have all the screens mapped, zoomed out to try and help you in the cheats and the help section. I'd loved to see that. And yes, of course I had it. It was an immensely frustrating game. the screens that always get to me. You're only 4 screens in when you get to that screen where you turn into a flying pig, and there's about 10 enemies going up and down the screen, and you've just got to time those jumps perfectly to get across and pick up the item, whatever the item is in that screen. I can't remember now, but it's just so frustrating. And there's that kind of pew sound every time you get hit by an enemy. And sometimes you can get hit by an enemy, and then you'll get, you'll immediately, as soon as you respawn, get hit by an enemy again, and all of your lives go really quickly. Everyone's been frustrated by that, I think, that's played it. And then after the pig screen, you've got this other screen where there's a saw coming up and down out of the water in the floor, and you've got to get pixel perfect jumps through these 3 steps. You're all nodding, so you've all been there and felt the frustration there. It's a beautiful and a horrible game all at once is how I would describe it. And if somebody could speedrun Jet Set Willy on Twitch for me, I would have immense respect for them. Never mind GoldenEye or all these other games people like to speedrun. Show me a pixel perfect speedrun of Jet Set Willy, and as far as I'm concerned, you're the greatest gamer that's ever lived. I'd love to see that. But this weekend, so yes, I had it on the 464, and in the cave, I often put Jet Set Willy on the 464. No, I put it on the Spectrum. I put Manic Miner on the 464. So I have Jet Set Willy on the Spectrum. There you go. Dave's holding up the box there, which is like a gurning telephone on Manic Miner. And Jet Set Willy is Miner Willy with his head down the toilet. I don't know who made that artwork, and if they did artwork for any other games, I'd be interested to know.
It's a little bit grotesque, isn't it?
It is a little bit. So I put Jet Set Willy on the Spectrum this weekend, and I didn't realize that the copy that we loaded had a trainer on it, which removed the enemies. So I just loaded the game, walked away. Dave was just holding up the copy protection code chart there, which was another annoyance of the game because it was so small and you had to look up the 4 colors to get into the game. So I'd loaded the game this weekend at the cave, not knowing the trainer was enabled, and I put up the chalkboard for the high score challenge. And it was about 4 hours into the day when someone came up to me and said, it was a Canadian chap, John. He said, Neil, what's the point of Jet Set Willy? Because I've scored like 7 points and I'm getting more and more lives. And people say it's hard. So I went over and had a look, and it's like, oh yeah, there's no enemies whatsoever in the game. You're just Maria wasn't even there. You're just walking around the mansion collecting things, and that was his first ever experience of Jet Set Willy. He must have thought, these English gamers, like, come on, why are they complaining that this game is so hard?
So an important thing you mentioned there is the frustrating thing where you die and you get that instant zap sound, which is really well done. But the game then places you back on the screen where you entered, which, if it happens to be where an enemy loads, you get killed again and again and again, you lose all your lives. That has been fixed for this. CPL has carefully selected spawn points, so if you do die, you get placed in a special place so that doesn't happen. Now, I particularly loved exploring in this game. I would set out with a goal of going out into space and exploring the rooms there, or sometimes going elsewhere. The original Spectrum game from 1984 didn't make it until the Amstrad until 1985, which back then was a long, long time. I know that games probably these days maybe don't get their first patch until a year later. But when it did make it to the CPC, they added 40 extra rooms on top of the original 64 and then ported that back to the Spectrum as Jet Set Willy, the Final Frontier, or sometimes known as Jet Set Willy 2. So I'm not sure if the 64 was enough for me to explore the same way that the 104 was. The extra stuff in space and so on was added to the Amstrad version, but I loved exploring. I just loved setting out to go and try and get somewhere different. The Matthew Smith's room names and so on were all really creative. They for something simple, you really felt as if you're going somewhere. I'd never had any delusions about collecting all the items. To solve the game, you had to get every single item and then bring it back to your bedroom to Maria. But it was, and Neil talks about someone doing a pixel perfect speedrun of Jet Set Willy. He means it's difficult. I'd never had any delusions about doing that. It was all about exploring the game for me. And I suppose maybe I treated it more as a bit of an adventure game. Now, Chris, you're a Spectrum fan. Have you even heard of one of the most famous Spectrum games of all time, or maybe even played it?
There's always a rib and a poke, isn't there? Yeah, which is all well and good. But yeah, the weird thing for me is when somebody says Jet Set Willy, what I actually see in my head is Manic Miner, which is forgivable. Look, it's a sequel to Manic Miner, and the graphics are so similar. They've used the same sprites, they've used the same enemies. What is it with these toilets? What's that about? Whose idea was it to have a toilet, sort of, in the corner of the levels and that kind of thing? But comparing level screenshots, it's definitely Manic Miner that I remember. If I did play Jet Set Willy, it would have been very briefly, perhaps at school, sort of thing that they'd load up for a bit of a treat, or in a shop. I actually, funnily enough, as when Neil held up that, Dave held up the box art just now. It's the Jet Set Willy box art that I hold more memories of. That certainly stands out in my mind. But in terms of the game and the game levels, it's certainly Manic Miner that I've played more of. So, yeah, more memories of that. And also, I don't know why, but again, when you name these two games, the game that springs into mind for me as well is Auf Wiedersehen Monty. Similar platformer. Auf Wiedersehen. Auf Wiedersehen. Shut up. But yeah, similar style platformer, very different style of graphics. But I spent hours and hours in Auf Wiedersehen Monty, not as much in Manic Miner, and certainly hardly any time at all in Jet Set Willy. Sorry, guys.
Fair enough. So the remake is not going to be on the Spectrum or any of our other micros, and it's not even finished, and it's not official, and it's not licensed. But all the same, I am really excited about it. He is looking to base the music on the CPC version as well, so I really hope he finishes it. And when it is finished, maybe I will make a serious attempt to complete Jet Set Willy. Maybe on the 64 screens I could do it, who knows. I also sent him out a little tweet, and I've done it's ended up being almost a mini interview with him. So I've asked him a few questions and here his answers. So I asked him which platform did he play it on, and he said he had it on the MSX machine, and he did finish it, which is incredible.
Wow.
And he says they did get the sequel, which was where he came across the Amstrad CPC music, because the Amstrad CPC music was ported to the MSX machine. He says the sense of exploration and being able to choose which way to go was pretty revolutionary at the time. So maybe that's why I made it scroll when I rebuilt it. That's how I imagined it in my head, as a single flowing space. And I think he's right. I mean, it was essentially Manic Miner, but you chose which rooms to go, which order to do them in. I asked him if he's going to finish the project, and he says yes. He says all the rooms and items are in place, and I've been able to test a full run of the game and collect everything. To finish, I need to wrap up the game with a title screen and the toilet run end sequence, which I won't spoil it for anyone who's not seen it. I also need the Monty Python foot game over screen. When you lost all your lives, you had the Monty Python foot coming down to crush you. Then add music, and it's pretty much done. I asked him, do you have any kind of estimate on when it will be finished? And he said, that's the much bigger question here, I'm guessing. It might be a while yet. This is a spare time hobby project. I'm a freelancer and a family man, and I have a lot going on in the coming months, which is great that I'm working, but not so great for finishing up Jet Set Willy. So I can't really put an estimate on it. What I will say is that the amazing response to the video has pushed it up the priority list. When I have the time, I'll get it done. I asked him if he's sticking to the rooms shown in the videos we've seen, or whether he will add the Final Frontier rooms, which is, for me, is space. And he said he's done just Jet Set Willy, but he did have to add a few rooms from Jet Set Willy Final Frontier to get things to line up properly, and even one from Manic Miner. So the original Jet Set Willy obviously wasn't perfect. He said once the project is done, if there is demand, he'll work on a Jet Set Willy 2 version. And he said there'll be a fair amount to add to the engine: the lifts, the diagonal enemies, transporters, the rocket, the trip switch and the yacht mechanic, the cartography room. And he thinks the jumping mechanic is slightly different for Jet Set Willy 2 as well. I didn't know that. And I asked him if he has anything he'd like me to say, and he says, just a huge thank you to everyone who sent such kind messages to me on Twitter, which is Twitter, kind messages. It happens. It was a first tweet from a new account. I was expecting it to get maybe 10 or 20 views and perhaps an "oh, that's cool" from 1 or 2 people. When I woke up the next day to 20,000 views and a huge no wages here, a huge wave of positivity, I couldn't believe it. Thanks to Steve Wetherill and Andy Noble for putting up with a barrage of notifications. Andy gave me a key clue in figuring out how the ropes work and why they wouldn't be in there without his help. And he says a huge shout out to Matthew Smith is also in order for creating a piece of work which is still so fondly remembered by so many after nearly 40 years. That's an amazing thing to have achieved. And he says, and thanks to you guys for including it in your podcast. If you'd like to go into more detail once I get the thing released, then let me know. And I'm sure if he does, and when he does release it, we'll touch back with him.
It's time now for our community question of the week. And based on the story of Doom being sold for silly money, what is the retro game that you desire the most and how much would you be willing to pay for it? In addition, have you already paid a hefty sum to acquire a special game? Regrets? Or are you happy that you did it? Dave, I know that you're an avid game collector. Do you want to start us off before we get on to the community answers?
Yeah, like you are, Neil, I am a big Ultima fan. So I had to have the original Ultima 1.
Dave, it's been great having you as a host on the show, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to fire you now for making me so jealous, holding up a boxed copy of Ultima 1. For which system? Is it the Apple?
This is for the, I think this is for the Apple II or the IBM PC? I'll find out. It is a mystery.
And this is an original. This isn't a reprint, a reproduction, or anything like that.
So this is the re-release. So when Ultima first came out, it hardly sold any copies. It wasn't too popular. It was popular enough, but the whole market wasn't very big at all. And by the time they got to Ultima 3, they've re-released it. So this is the re-release of Ultima 1. I say re-release, as it is the Apple II. I say re-release, but it's this will be the early 80s still. So this is still very rare, still very valuable.
Dare I ask, how much did you pay for this?
Yes, you can ask. You can ask me how much I paid for it. Yeah, I paid £205 for it.
Ouch.
How long ago was this?
This was only a few months ago. This is only maybe 3 months ago.
Okay, so that is probably a good deal actually for a game that's so collectible and so rare.
I think the price has come down slightly on games.
Really,
in the past 9 months or so since the restrictions ended and people have cleared out their lofts already. I think prices have come down slightly, but it's a lot of money. But I wouldn't have it any other. I would never get hold of this game otherwise.
Yeah, a real jewel in the crown, I think, for your collection, definitely. For me, I was looking through my eBay listings. Unfortunately, eBay only lets you go back a couple of years. Yeah. I've been on there for a decade, over a decade. I would love to go back and see, but or maybe I wouldn't. But in most recent years, the most I've spent on a game is the Commodore 64 games on a CD pack, which I did an episode on some time back, and that's a very rare thing. I think it came over. I got it from Germany. I paid £125 for that pack. So that's 10 Commodore 64 games on a CD, all boxed up with an adapter to plug your CD player into the C64 and load the games. I can kind of justify it by saying, well, I made a video on it and that in turn made some revenue, which would have taken the edge off the cost of it. And it's now in a display cabinet for people to enjoy when they come and visit the cave. But have I spent more than that on a game? I don't think I have. My buying habits tend to be around the £10 to £15 price tag on eBay. That's where the majority of my spending goes. It'll have to be something pretty special to get into 3 figures, or something I can make an episode on. But there you go. Those are my eBay findings.
This is my most expensive one to date, and it's just Shadow the Beast 2 long box, which cost me. This was actually local, so when I say local, it was over in the eastern states in Australia, but around £75. Plus postage. So I'm a bit like you, Neil. I don't like to spend too much when I'm buying games, but now I've realized, now that I've proudly got my Atari Jaguar, I think the good times are over, because when I look at the price of almost any Atari Jaguar game, they kind of start at £50 and then just go north from there. So yeah, it's going to get
Does Shadow of the Beast 2 have any feelies in the box? Because I know the first one had a t-shirt with it.
Funny enough, I've also got number 1 long box, which I got for £50, but that's waiting for me at my parents' house in the UK, so I'll collect that later this year. But neither of them have the t-shirt. Yeah, it's just in no friggin' way you're going to find out, Bill. But yeah, no, all this has got, and all the other one has got, is just the discs and the manual.
Okay,
which you
it's
can't
not
do.
missing anything though. That's just how it came, was it?
Well, no, but I mean, part of the question was, do you have any regrets? The Shadow of the Beast copy, my dad actually unboxed it for me over Skype, and both him and my mum were saying, this is brand new. And of course, they didn't quite comprehend this is a very old game that I've bought off eBay. When I bought this one, which was from a seller over east, over here, it was advertised as in as new condition. And I mean, you won't be able to tell from the footage, but it really isn't. The box has lost its sheen. There's some rippling. There's a dent in the box. And probably the most disappointing, keeping in mind this is the most expensive game I've bought, is the fact that there's writing on the inside of the lid. It's got the cheat codes.
Oh, okay. So definitely not as new. And there's a great big yellow sticker on the front, Chris. Have you noticed that?
Oh yeah, but it says T-shirt enclosed, but it's not in the box. Yeah,
No
is
T-shirt.
what I mean.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
no
it would have
T-shirt.
come with a
in
T-shirt
either
originally.
copy. It would have come with a T-shirt. But when you look at copies of Shadow of the Beast and Shadow of the Beast 2, if they do have the T-shirt, you're talking stupid money, absolutely stupid money for a T-shirt that's going to fall apart the first time you put it through the wash if you're stupid enough to wear it.
It's got. I mean, if it's sitting folded in that box, it's got to be.
Yeah,
there'll be a permanent crease in it. Yeah. I'm not sure there's any real value to it.
Absolutely stupid money. Yeah.
I recently saw Longbox Shadow of the Beast on eBay, but it was part of a job lot of other Amiga games, and I thought, oh, that could be a bargain to be had here. But clearly, a lot of other people saw it, and that the price just skyrocketed, and everyone was just bidding on that because it had Shadow of the Beast in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's get on now to our listeners' answers. I'll go first. We've got Richard Shear's answer. Hello, Richard and Elmo. And Richard says, my most desired game that I spent the most for was Stunt Car Racer. No, I didn't spend silly money for it. I was patient and managed to get it for the same price that I paid back in the day. And then he's got a little trademark symbol there, back in the day. The reason for mentioning this game is because it's the highest price I've paid to recollect it. It was the first game that I played multiplayer. Okay, so that's why he's so fond of this one. He says, I remember my poor friend lugging his wedge-shaped computer and worse, the Philips 8833 monitor over to my house when arriving. I mentioned that maybe he would have been better plugging into my TV. That and the fact that we spent numerous evenings laughing and playing this game has meant that it's one that sticks out so clearly. So there you go. He paid pretty much the original retail price for Stunt Car Racer.
It's a great game.
You can't complain too much, can you? If you're paying the price today that it would have been in the shops back in the day, I think that's all right.
No,
that's kind of nice. Bit of parity. Yeah. Chris, who have we got next?
Yep. So the next one is for Skit. That'll do. And he says, I think I paid £35 for Simpsons Hit and Run on the GameCube. Is numerically the most I've paid. However, I bought Gloom on the Amiga when it first came out. It was $19.99, a year's birthday money. So it was much more expensive than a week's beer money I spent on Hit and Run. That's inflation for you. I like the maths being done. Always comes down to me. How many beers did that cost? That's the real value.
I hope a spreadsheet was used to figure that out.
It'll be a bar chart.
And our final viewer answer is from Suspicious Peanut. And I don't know if that means that it's a peanut. It's not a peanut. It looks like a peanut, but suspiciously it's not. Or whether the peanut is acting suspiciously, or whether the peanut is suspicious of us. He says, for me, it would be Panzer Dragoon Saga for the Sega Saturn, which must be some kind of console. I bought it at, I found it at a retro games convention for €181, and I was willing to pay that. Now that's €180 must be around £150. So that's a lot. The booth, he says, is it called that? And yes, it's called a booth in the UK. Was a bit crowded, so I skipped back to pick it up later. There was plenty to do at the convention, and I bought plenty of games, but at the end, I forgot all about the game I wanted to buy. Then COVID happened, and no more conventions, and when I look back at the eBay pricing starting at over €600, I think, never mind. Love the show. Cheers.
Oh dear. Nice. Panzer Dragoon, not Saga, but just Panzer Dragoon is the one I always remember on loop in the shop window when the Sega Saturn came out. So at least here in the UK, it was kind of the game that launched the Sega Saturn, wasn't it? Do you guys remember that being on loop? No.
I wouldn't know a Sega Saturn if it came up and bit me.
I played on one, but it was Daytona. just a party, just drinking and playing Daytona. That's my Sega Saturn memories.
Well, I'm working on repairing one at the moment, so hopefully I'll get more familiar with the system. I had a friend who had one back in the day, and we used to play Nights into Dreams and Daytona and Sega Rally and all that stuff. And I was impressed at the time. The standout title for me is Outrun on the Sega Ages compilation pack. It's got a fantastic version of Outrun, and I think that's the only reason that I'm trying to repair the Saturn at the moment, so I can play my favorite version of Outrun. So we'll get that up and running in the cave soon. Thank you to everyone. Go on, Dave.
Is the Sega Saturn the one that gets the Fenrir in it? Is that the upgrade for it?
Yeah, that's
right,
the.
So I have seen that, and I've seen it upgraded, and actually it's a great little machine when it's upgraded. So I'm sorry, Sega fans.
The optical drive replacement. Come on, we're on board with Sega after last week when they fully committed to retro. We're on board with them. Let's be nice to Sega. So, new question of the week. If you'd like to participate in our question of the week, head over to reddit.com/r/this week in retro. And so it's time for this week's community question of the week, which is, when it comes to productivity applications like Lotus 123, which application did you find the hardest to let go of? How long did you cling on to it for? Perhaps it was a music making application, a spreadsheet, an office application, a paint package, could be absolutely anything. Let's have a question that isn't game related this week. So productivity applications that you dug your fingernails into and just couldn't let go of. Tell us the story and tell us what you moved on to next. And was there buyer's remorse when you moved on to that next thing? Or did you think, why the hell did I cling on to that for so long? Answers, please, at reddit.com/r/this week in retro. We're looking forward to your answers. Chris, Dave, thanks for joining me this week for This Week in Retro. And we will catch everyone next week. Thanks for listening. Take care.
Thank you, Neil. Bye.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC The Cave, Chris from 005 AGIMA, and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.